Filibuster, and other nuclear options. Welcome to Law and Society. Please subscribe. Today we're going to talk about how Donald Trump is getting increasingly comfortable with using the word nuclear. And there are a lot of we have come to understand the term nuclear, the nuclear option, as being the ultimate thing. It's the very end, ultimate solution or medicine for the ultimate problem. And we are now at a cusp where we are at the precipice of multiple nuclear options that Donald Trump's regime has placed ahead of us, and it requires more discussion. So, in that spirit, let's get started. Before I get started, however, I have a housekeeping message. Somebody commented on my one of my videos that what is this Indian guy in a black and white video with a wig on? Well, sir, you are right. I am Indian. I'm American by nationality. This is a black and white video. But I will have you know that this hair is not a wig. This hair is an out-of-control creature that I somehow gather into something cohesive during my talks. And then my hair is all over the place again. So it is very much my own hair. Anyway, now talking about the more important things. We know that Donald Trump has talked about resuming nuclear tests, and that is a first in over 30 years that the United States will resume nuclear testing. It takes the world away from the posture that the United States had led for so many decades, that we want to reduce nuclear arms around the world as opposed to test them and build more. But with one statement, Donald Trump upended decades of policy, and now everybody's talking about the nuclear option of testing nuclear weapons, and a new arms race seems to be around the corner. Then recently, Donald Trump, tonight, Donald Trump went out and said that Republicans need to use the nuclear option, which is to vote to end the filibuster in the Senate so they could pass the continuing resolution for funding that the House had passed last month and then just not been in session for the rest of the time. Just be in session once every few days to show that Congress is open, but no real work is being done. And so Donald Trump pushes the Senate to get rid of the filibuster. I have included in the resources and the references what a filibuster is, but essentially, in short, the filibuster is a process by which, when a bill comes to the Senate floor, before a final vote, there are debates. And in order to close the debates and then go on to final voting, there is this cloture that needs to happen where you need 60 Senate votes to end the debates on a particular legislation and go on to the final vote, which is simple majority vote of 51 votes. Well, this filibuster is a creature that anybody who uses it is using it for their benefit, and the other party says we should do away with it. And when Democrats are in power and Republicans are using the filibuster, Democrats say we want to get rid of it. What that entails has a historical underpinnings about the filibuster as a mechanism in the Senate, and many call it racist, many call it disenfranchising, but the minority party always has the advantage of using that to stop some really bad legislation from passing Congress, and gives the minority party some leverage to be able to shape legislation. And so Donald Trump wants that to be gone. And Donald Trump wants the continuing resolution to go forward that does not have that cuts SNAP funding by billions and billions of dollars, that cuts Medicaid funding by $1 trillion, that cuts Medicare funding by millions of dollars, and cuts SNAP assistance, like I said that. And so it makes, it creates food insecurity for millions of people. It creates healthcare insecurity for millions of people. And what the Democrats have said, and if they wanted from the very beginning, is that the continuing resolution include an extension of the Affordable Care Act tax subsidies, as well as cut back on the Medicaid cuts that's in the big bad bill, and cut back on the SNAP cuts in the big bad bill. But Republicans will not allow that to happen, and therefore they're not going to open Congress and come up with a solution. The Senate has also, I think, voting on a standalone bill for the SNAP assistance to continue, but Mike Johnson doesn't seem very keen on that. So that's where we are, and that's where the nuclear option is being used, because tomorrow, on Saturday, SNAP ends. SNAP funding runs out. And so it is important, and on one hand, Mike Johnson is saying it's going to be dire for everybody, but then he is lying to the American people with a straight face, saying that it is the Democrats who are doing this, when it is really the Republicans who rammed through the omnibus bill of the Big Beautiful Act that includes these massive cuts on Medicaid, Medicare, SNAP, and other necessary programs like health education, health information to the State Departments, education funding. A lot of funding is being cut in the big bad bill. But in this situation, in this particular option, we're talking about continuing SNAP, which is what Democrats want, continuing ACA subsidies, which is what Democrats want, cutting Medicaid cuts that have been approved in the big bad bill, meaning reducing the number of $1 trillion cuts down to something more reasonable, so Americans are not left out on their own under and crushed under the weight of medical debt. So it is kind of a nuclear place that our country finds ourselves in. And if the Senate were to do away with the filibuster, it's going to come back and bite them at any time that the Senate chamber goes to the other party. And the best option is to negotiate a continuing resolution that adds ACA subsidies, that allows for SNAP benefits to go out to the people as opposed to run out. And right now, there are 25 attorneys general who have sued the federal government to make sure that the contingency fund, for which there's about $6 billion in a fund that is meant to support SNAP in cases of emergencies, but Republicans will not release that money despite the fact that it's been allocated for SNAP emergencies. So we are at an emergency, a nuclear option point when it comes to the welfare of the American people. And then you have this encroaching police state that I've been talking about. And, Governor Pritzker of Illinois made a public request to DHS Secretary Kristi Noem that please don't patrol our streets, don't intimidate our children on Halloween. Let them have a normal Halloween. And Kristi Noem said no. Kristi Noem said they're going to have guards on the streets to make people safe. That is not what federal agents are doing. Not guards, sorry. Guard has been stopped by the court. But the federal agents that are still in the cities, Noem doesn't have any plans whatsoever to remove those federal agents during Halloween. So they are there to intimidate children during Halloween. In addition to that, there's news that the Pentagon has ordered the Guard to have 500 Guard members trained as quick reaction forces for domestic unrest. And these forces are to be set in place by January 2026. The reason why I am talking about this in the nuclear option episode is because we are coming to a point where, despite what the courts are doing, Donald Trump's regime is moving forward, not just with DHS and federal agents coming from ICE and Border Patrol, but also Guard deployment in anticipation of unrest. Professor Heather Cox Richardson says, in August, the administration planned for 2 groups of 300 troops to be stationed in Alabama and Arizona as a domestic civil disturbance quick reaction force. Now that number is 23,500, and the troops will be in every state and territory. The professor continues, the establishment of a domestic quick reaction force to quell civil disturbances at a time when there are no civil disturbances that can't be handled easily by existing law enforcement suggests the administration is expecting those conditions to change. The professor warns, these are signs the administration is not just trying to give the impression that Americans are rioting, but is trying to push them to do so. And, deployment of federal agents, intimidation of people, disappearing of people in the middle of the neighborhoods, peaceful neighborhoods, that's what's creating this sort of atmosphere where people feel compelled to protest. And Donald Trump is creating that atmosphere, building that up by Kristi Noem denying Pritzker's request of stopping Fed agents from coming into Chicago during Halloween. Pritzker says on the denial of the request, we know Kristi Noem must love Halloween because she always dresses in law enforcement costumes. But what is truly shameful is that she refuses to agree that we shouldn't tear gas children trick-or-treating. Mind you, they have tear gas children before. And that is where we are as an encroaching police state comes into American cities and harasses, intimidates, and disappears people and arrests peaceful protesters in democratic cities to create the atmosphere for which you would need quick reaction forces so that Donald Trump may invoke the Insurrection Act because those conditions have now been manufactured by Donald Trump and his DHS. The Guard still remains undeployed because the cases are hanging in the 9th Circuit and the 7th Circuit, and the Supreme Court has asked for more information about the 7th Circuit ruling that stopped deployment of the National Guard, because that has gone up through the appellate court, and the 7th Circuit is not going to look at it in an en banc, the whole court basis. The last thing I want to talk about is the saga of Jeffrey Epstein's survivors. And we are coming to a point now that it is clear that Speaker Mike Johnson does not want to release the Epstein files. And I believe that even when they are forced to release the Epstein files, that they are going to do it in such a manner that we're not going to get any pertinent information from it. That's very, very likely. But the fact that they will not release it, the fact that they will not swear in Adelita Grijalva is a showing of how desperate the Republican Party is to keep the Epstein files away from the public eye. So again, Professor Richardson says, the survivors, Professor Richardson talks about and refers to Jim Acosta's interview about the letter that survivors of Epstein have sent to Congress in order for the files to be released. And the reason why I'm talking about this in the nuclear option is because we have come to the end of the road. It is clear that Congress doesn't want to release the Epstein files. And Mike Johnson is getting in the way of it in a very real way. And he is now refusing to seat a duly elected representative. So the professor said, the survivors write that Johnson's continued refusal to seat her, which is Adelita Grijalva, is an unacceptable breach of democratic norms and a disservice to the American people. Even more concerning to us survivors, this delay appears to be a deliberate attempt to block her participation in the discharge petition that would force a vote to unseal the Epstein-Maxwell files. The American public has a right to transparency and accountability, and we, as survivors, deserve justice. Any attempt to obstruct a vote on this matter by manipulating House procedure or denying elected members their seats is a direct affront to that right and adds insult to our trauma. I have posted on the thumbnail for this video a picture of Virginia Giuffre because I believe she's the face of this movement. She gave us the book Nobody's Girl, but she's every single one of our heroes if we have endured abuse. And I want people to understand that the time is now that we need the survivors to be heard, their stories to be heard, and for society as a whole to say that no, the rich and powerful can't abuse regular people and people who are in dire disadvantage to their benefit just because they are rich and powerful, that they are not above the rule of law, that they face accountability. To that end, the King of England, King Charles, has stripped his brother Andrew of his princely titles and kicked him out of royal grounds. He will now be living in private housing that is his own, and he is no longer going to be counted as part of the royal family because of Andrew's involvement with Virginia. And despite the fact that Andrew keeps denying it, the King of England has said, no, I'm putting my foot down. You no longer have the prince title. Well, that's a big deal happening in the United Kingdom. Why is that not happening here? Why are we not holding those multimillionaires and billionaires and allegedly prime ministers accountable by at least making public their evil deeds? That is something that is critical. That is something that has reached a point where the nuclear option right now is for the survivors to come up with a list and their stories and have Representative Massey or Representative Khanna read it out on the Congress floor so as to shield the survivors from liability based on the protection of the speech or debate clause that protects members of Congress from reading anything, whatever they want, on Congress's floor. And by the protection of the speech or debate clause, they cannot be held liable. And that is, by the way, that is the only sort of immunity that is in the Constitution. And it is for members of Congress. It's important to remember, as we live in an era where everybody talks about all the things for which Donald Trump is immune, it is something that we have to remind ourselves that presidential immunity is a creation of the Roberts Supreme Court. Nowhere in the Constitution is there a provision that gives the president immunity, near total immunity, that Trump v. USA bestows on presidents. With that said, I've gone on for 20 minutes talking about this. I hope that you will read the stories and go in and check the references in the reference box and keep paying attention to these different news stories, because we are getting to the point where we're coming to the end of the line and we're going to see a disruption happen in every single one of these instances. We're going to see some sort of a disruption happen even in the economic sphere. Massive disruption is happening because we don't know how the economy is going, because the numbers aren't coming out as regularly as they should. So economists are going between recession and stagflation, and it's not great, but it's not bad because we don't know the numbers. And I feel like we are on a really dangerous path where the bottom can drop out at any minute. And if it does, the American people will rise up and the government will not be able to control it. And that may come as soon as tomorrow when SNAP runs out. It may come as soon as next week when health insurance premiums skyrocket, because that's happening across the country. People are feeling the pain now. That's why unions are calling on the government to open the government, because not only are the provisions that have been set going to harm Americans if they were passed as they were, it is also causing 1.4 million federal workers to go without a paycheck. They are standing in food pantry, food kitchen, and food bank lines. And so the emergency is here. The emergency to the American people of not having a job, not having money is here. And we need to address that. Thank you so much for listening. Please like, share, and subscribe, and I'll talk to you soon.